And we are live. What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, where we make the promise to bring you the best guests in all of true crime. And this episode, as you're about to find out, is no exception. But first, it's been 9 weeks and 3 days since 4 young University of Idaho students were savagely murdered, stabbed to death in their off-campus home. We always start the show by remembering the victims. So let us never forget those young lives lost way too soon. Madison Mogen, 21, Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20 as well. May their memories be a blessing. Police say the killer is 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger. We want to remind everyone that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, which is what our best guest today make sure happens. Lara Yeretsian is the principal of Yeretsian Law, a criminal defense firm in Glendale, California. She's known not only as a tenacious advocate and master negotiator, but also as a compassionate and uplifting guide for her clients through the often intimidating legal system. While at the law offices of Garagos and Garagos, as in Mark Garagos, Lara worked extensively on numerous high-profile criminal cases, including those of Michael Jackson, you may have heard of, as well as hip-hop artist Nate Dogg, the James Bond director Lee Tamahori, and infamously known Scott Peterson, who is convicted in prison for murdering his wife and young baby. Jeffrey Lichtman is the other guest. He's been a criminal defense attorney for over 30 years, practicing primarily in the federal and state courts of New York. His high-profile clients include the Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a good guy to have on your side if you can get him, and John Gotti Jr., as well as rappers The Game and Fat Joe. Some housekeeping notes to start with. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. On Twitter, we're at Podcast STS. Please support us on Patreon, and there's a YouTube subscription now. You can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. And last but not least, as my 8-year-old daughter says, please hit that subscribe button and smash the like button. That algorithm gets chugging if you do that. Now, there is quite a bit of news out there today on two fronts. On the story out of Moscow, Idaho, which we'll be focusing on, as well as Brian Walsh and his now presumed dead and murdered wife, Anna Walsh. First, to the latest with Bryan Kohberger. Authorities unsealed a search warrant today detailing the items that they seized in Kohberger's Pullman, Washington residence. This comes after he was arrested and charged with the murders of the 4 Idaho students. Among the items seized from the residence include 1 disposable black glove, receipts from Walmart and Marshall's, a dust container vacuum, possible hair strands, 1 Fire TV stick, 1 possible animal hair strand, 1 computer tower, an item with a dark red spot, which sounds like blood to me, 2 pieces of an uncased pillow with a reddish-brown stain, which sounds like blood to me, and mattress covers. Jeffrey Lichtman, to you first. The warrant, it wasn't supposed to be unsealed till March 1st. Suddenly it's unsealed today on January 18th. Why would they unseal it prematurely?
You know, it may be that they wanted to get more information out to the public. It's obviously a very heinous and serious crime, and they felt that the more information that gets out, the better. What it does, though, probably is infect the jury pool a little more than it has to. But in a case like this, it's not like everybody on the planet that doesn't know about the case and isn't going to be aware of the evidence prior to jury selection.
Lara,
so to me, it doesn't really make a difference. You're not going to win or lose the case at this point.
And sorry about that, Jeff. You froze up a second. I thought you had finished speaking. Apologies. Lara, to you. I know there's no such thing as a slam dunk case, but the evidence is piling up. And I should mention that just before coming on air, I was looking at some comments who said, how dare you, presume guilt instead of innocence with this defendant. Is this going to be a tough case to try to defend?
As you said, the evidence is piling on. You know that this is an ongoing investigation. They clearly wanted to get him before the students were going to come back to campus. We know that they got him right before students came back. Most of the students had left town. I think about 10,000 of students from the university had left, and they had to make sure everybody was comfortable to come back, and they had to get the suspect. And in this case, they had enough, I'm assuming, based on the affidavit that they had, to make the arrest. But then it looks like they hadn't completed their investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. And the more they dig, it looks like they're getting their hands on more and more information. And they're, slowly giving us a preview of the information, just as we saw the search warrant affidavit that was released today. I haven't had a chance to read it. I started, but I couldn't complete it. And I'm assuming it's going to have some more information that we didn't have originally.
Jeffrey, let's say you were young in your law career, not an established defense attorney yet, and you were living in Idaho, you're a public defender, and you get handed this case. What would you be doing right now to try to defend Bryan Kohberger?
Well, I'm trying to imagine if I can remember what I was like when I was 25, 26 as a defense attorney. It's been so many years, I forgot most of it. That's why I do my own podcast, that I can put it all down, remember it, when I really don't remember any of this. I think at this point, look, you can't be overwhelmed by the evidence. You can't just start the case and think, oh God, I have no chance to win, so we're just going to just throw in the towel, because you don't have a choice. When you're the public defender, or whoever's representing him, despite the fact that all of society hates your guts, you still have to defend this man, and you still have to defend him zealously. So you don't just look at this like, I've got to hit 4 grand slams on 4 consecutive pitches, piece by piece, overwhelmed. You take the first and look for any holes, and you keep on doing that.
Oh, we're having a little issue with Jeff's audio. Sorry about that, Jeff. You're cutting out a little bit. So I'm going to just switch it over to Lara for a moment. This is obviously about as high profile comes. I know you worked with Mark Garagos on the Scott Peterson trial, which was arguably, as high profile. It was a media,
Circus.
storm at the time. But how do you handle the media aspect of all this, trying to still paint a picture of your defendant that will, raise enough reasonable doubt to a jury when the media is just basically destroying this guy publicly?
Well, in this case, there's a gag order, so it's not like they can battle it out in the media, at least as far as the defense is concerned. But we're seeing some information, despite that gag order. There's information that's being released, including this affidavit, and the media is having a field day. I guess the most that they can do at this point is make sure he's being humanized through family members, friends, anyone who can say anything positive. But all I've been reading, honestly, have been every little thing that anyone could find about this guy, from even childhood. That's what everybody's talking about. Anything negative they can find is what's been covered recently by the media. So then the only thing I can think of right now, because of the gag order, is they can't really address the evidence, but what they could do is fight it out in a courtroom and bring about motions and arguments and do their own investigation in the case, and through the case itself try to change as much as possible through some of the arguments made in court that's obviously being covered by the media and emotions, and try and bring forth some issues here, whether it be weaknesses in the evidence. And I'm assuming there are, if there's an alibi of some sort. I don't know what they've got. They know what it is that they've got in their bag of tricks. Whatever they've got that's positive, that can be helpful and can change this tide, then they need to present it. And I agree with Jeffrey that you cannot let the evidence overwhelm you. Almost every case, when you start, they don't file these cases unless they believe they can prove these cases, right? The prosecution doesn't just go filing cases willy-nilly. Sometimes it happens, but most of the time they don't. So you can't get overwhelmed. And as a criminal defense attorney, you need to stay focused, bring on, the right team, bring on the experts that you need to fight some of the forensic stuff and whatever else that you need to investigate on your own, and do your due diligence and advocate for your client as best as you can. Even if you can't get them off, sometimes there's enough weaknesses where you can maybe potentially get a deal. We'll see if that's even going to happen in a case like this.
Kayla Phillips, whose comment is not up on the screen, writes, he reminds me of Ted Bundy. As a side note and a shameless plug, I interviewed Nancy Grace today. The episode will air tomorrow morning. She's currently working on a piece comparing Ted Bundy to Bryan Kohberger that's going to be released on Fox Nation, which is where Nancy Grace works. That episode will drop at 6 a.m. Eastern time, Thursday morning. Nancy Grace's take on all this. Meanwhile, Idaho, who we had on yesterday, and I remember the name, comment here, Jeffrey, we'll toss this one to you. Has a public defender ever tried a case like this and won before? It seems like a case of this magnitude always has a paid attorney. Is there a difference in skill or expertise? Can you recollect any case where a public defender won?
I'm sure there's some. You've got a very big country here with many courthouses and many courtrooms and many trials. So I'm sure public defenders have one. Certainly federally, the federal defenders, they win cases. This is a huge case. Do I think that there's a difference? Sometimes there's a difference in experience, but in a case like this, where there's potentially the death penalty, they're not going to give this to some young public defender who's never tried a case before. They're going to give it to the most seasoned trial attorneys that they have in the office. Are they better or are they worse? Look, I can tell you this. I've tried cases with many paid lawyers, and they're grossly incompetent. And I've tried cases with many lawyers that are court appointed, paid by the state, paid by the federal government, and they were much better than the retained lawyers. So I think it can go both ways. And, to get back to something that you said before is with the publicity. Look, I remember trying Gotti when I was in my 30s, and I was, the lead lawyer for the entire case. And it was one of the first major trials I had ever had. You have to manipulate everything. There was gag orders in place. So what did we do? We had everybody in his family give interviews at certain periods of time before the trial started. During jury selection, we released an interview with the family. You do everything you can to manipulate, because you can be damn sure that the government is doing everything they can to destroy you and destroy your client. And at the end of the day, you're going to be sitting in front of 12 jurors, perhaps 18 with the alternates at first. And you're going to look in their eyes and say, look, I know that you think our client is guilty. I know that you want to convict. But if this was your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, or you, would you want a jury rushing to judgment before you've even heard the evidence? And I remember the tabloids in New York were laughing at my defense that I had created for Gotti, that he had withdrawn from the mafia. Everybody thought it was a big joke. Guess what? 23 days of trial days later, he walked out of court from jail. The jury doesn't necessarily think, well, I'm going to be fair, but when they're sitting in a closed room and they have the pressure, the responsibility on their shoulders, and it's massive, and they often take it a lot more seriously when they're in the jury room and they're deciding some man or woman's fate, all of a sudden they're fair. They're not looking at the news perhaps, and they can be fair, and you'd be surprised. You can win a lot of cases, even though they seem completely dead.
Lara, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I'm going to go to Jeffrey first. What makes a great defense attorney, Jeffrey?
Well, first of all, you've got to be completely maniacal with your work ethic. You have to outwork the other side. You can't be lazy. And, it drives me nuts today when I think of what I was at 25 as a defense lawyer. I worked every weekend, every holiday. I was in prison on New Year's Eve. I remember one time visiting a client. You have to have a maniacal work ethic. In addition, you have to be willing to try anything, be open-minded, and you have to have a good sense of humor. Because if you don't have a good sense of humor when you get in front of a jury with cases that are just impossible to win, you have to get this jury to like you. because they're not going to vote to acquit if they not only hate your client, but they hate your guts as well. So if you can charm them, if you can humor them, you'd be surprised. I mean, here's a crazy stat. Until the El Chapo case, which I came on 2 months before I did the opening statement, I had gone 11 years without losing a trial, federal or state. I had many hung juries in between, along with acquittals. But I'm telling you that even though the cases are dead, all you need to do is convince one juror. All you need to do is charm one juror. And guess what? They can just destroy the government's entire case.
Sue writes that Ann Taylor, who is Bryan Kohberger's public defender, is a very skilled attorney. I have heard that. I don't know her personally, but I have heard that. Lara, to you, what do you think makes a great defense attorney?
I think a lawyer who's got the experience but can also think outside the box is crucial for a great attorney. You've got to be creative. You've got to also, I agree with Jeffrey, you've got to somehow bond with that jury. I've always said it, and I'll say it again, you win and lose trials during jury selection. Once you've got your jury, you've got those 12 people plus your alternates, obviously, and they're in the box, and they're the people that are going to make the difference. They're going to make the decision in this case. You bond with them and you pick the right people, then you've already won the case. Now, how easy is that? And I know Jeffrey had this opinion that most of these jurors will do the right thing, but I've also seen jurors do the wrong things. I've seen jurors who've got on, and I call them the stealth jurors, because they've got an agenda and they will pretend and they will give you the best answers possible and convince both sides that they can be fair, unbiased for both sides. They will not make up their minds. But then once the case is over and you hear them talking to the media and you're wondering, where were you? Were you really listening to the evidence? So those are very, very important things. Yes, I mean, being a defense attorney is not just about knowing the law and being ethical and doing everything right. Yes, it requires, I agree with Jeffrey, my goodness, especially a case like this, I'm sure this is going to be the attorney's life. She's going to breathe this day in, day out, every minute of the day while this is ongoing. It takes a lot of hard work, commitment, dedication, and passion. You've got to care about the clients. You've got to care. If you don't care, you're not going to deliver.
And Lara, I think I read it was definitely you quoted. I think it was Fox News Digital, where you basically looked at the PCA, the probable cause affidavit, and you said it'll be easy to poke holes in this. Can you? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you elaborate on what you were saying in that article?
In that article, we were basically only discussing the affidavit itself, the original affidavit that we got. And it was limited. There were a number of paragraphs that were redacted, but whatever we had, based on what we were able to read, I was saying, there are some issues here. For example, the thick eyebrows. Okay, most men, you can say, have thick eyebrows. What's the definition of thick eyebrows? How do you identify a suspect based on thick eyebrows? Does he really have thick eyebrows? Then you've got the Vans, the shoe prints. Wonderful Vans. I think I don't even know if I can find an individual in the United States who has never owned a pair of Vans. So anyway, again, it's a wide swath of people. Who, again, how do you narrow down this indiviother, the suspect? That's
Lara lives in LA, so everyone in LA wears Vans.
Clearly.
The other thing was the cell tower. Again, the affidavit, I'm sure, is not all inclusive. I'm sure there's more here. I'm assuming there's more here if they arrested him, right? And I thought the cell towers were kind of iffy. He lives 8 or 10 miles away from the crime scene, and his phone, even if he's at home or near his home, could have potentially, this seems to be a rural area, so I'm assuming there aren't too many cell towers. So it's very possible that even if he was at home or near his home, if he made a call, he would have used the cell tower near the crime scene. So I didn't think that was that strong. There's all sorts of issues here. But again, I'm waiting to see what the rest of the evidence is. As we get more of it, and we'll know more.
And in fairness to Lara, when she initially looked at the first document, that was before they found the knife sheath that was in the victim's bedroom, which surely has the defendant's DNA on it, I suspect. And that's sort of, any holes that you can poke, they get plugged up pretty quickly when you've got DNA in the room where it doesn't belong.
Unless there's some kind of a relationship here. I was wondering about that. And again, we don't have enough information. I mean, it's possible that he may have touched it somewhere else. And are they suspecting that a knife was in fact used in this case? Is it a knife or is it something else? There's also, again, we don't have enough information. I'm assuming clearly law enforcement has a lot more than they've given us. And
I've also heard speculation that, or people, I should say, wondering whether that DNA on the sheath is actually Bryan Kohberger's, because it was never explicitly said to be. Some people are wondering if it's possibly the father's DNA. Curious, Jeffrey, what kind of what kind of curveball would that be if it turned out it wasn't Bryan Kohberger's DNA, but the father?
Well, keep in mind that the reason why there's even a discussion about the fact that it might be the father's is because when they compared the DNA to the known sample, the father obviously has half of the same DNA as the son. So inevitably, when they're trying to eliminate people whose DNA it can't be, they can't eliminate the father. So naturally, the internet sleuths all over the country, all over the world are saying, aha, maybe the father did it. No, it's just that they have 50% of the same DNA. You've also got the issue with his car in the area. There's so many other pieces of evidence. You may even think about possibly a psychological defense. It's really too early. Look, and also Lara and I will both say, we're just talking heads. There's a reason why I rarely talk about cases in the media that are not my own, because I don't know what the hell all the evidence is. And all I'm doing is blabbing about somebody else's case, and I don't have all the evidence in front of me. I hate it when I'm representing somebody and I see some putz on TV talking about my case as if they know what I've got in my office, all the evidence. Drives me nuts. So, of course, now I'm guilty of the same.
And Jeffrey, by the way, is from New Jersey like me, and we use the word putz, which is awesome. But Lara, I want to get your take on this. So some other news that came out, believe it or not, reported by People magazine, not in the upper echelons of investigative journalism for sure, but nevertheless, they say they spoke to a law enforcement person in law enforcement very close to the case, who says that Bryan Kohberger actually sent a greeting to one of the three female victims, we don't know which one, through Instagram. And when he didn't get a reply, he sent several more messages to her. The quote from the law enforcement official was, he slid into one of the girls' DMs several times, but she didn't respond. Basically, it was just him saying, hey, how are you? But he did it again and again. From my perspective, it's creepy. I think a lot of women would think it's creepy, but does that necessarily make him a killer or tie him to the murders?
I mean, it's one more piece of evidence that points towards that. I mean, that you've got to admit. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. But again, what the prosecution is going to do is take every little bit and then put them all together and say, look at all of this. It's not just one thing. It's not just the car being in the area. It's not him just potentially turning off his phone. It's not just his DNA, possibly his DNA on the sheath. It's not just the cell towers picking up. It's not just him being there 12 times in the 5 months prior, maybe stalking. But it's also, look, he even tried. Now there's some kind of a connection. We've all been asking, has there been any connection? Is there any relationship? Does he know these people? Has he ever talked to them? We don't know any of it. Now we know he's at least saying, hey, how are you? At least a few times. I'm not sure what it means that law enforcement is saying he slid into her DM. I'm not sure how you slide into a DM, honestly. Maybe I need a social media guru to explain that to me. But I think it's pretty easy to just send messages to people in social media, and everybody gets them. I get some creepy ones too. Everybody gets them, and you just ignore them. And it looks like that's what she did. She ignored it. She never responded.
Cool. I think that's the cool kids terminology to slide into a DM. But I'm definitely not one of those cool kids. But
I guess I'm not a cool kid.
Louise Rouleau writes, What are the chances he might not have a jury, just a judge for the trial? Would he ever opt for a bench trial? And can you explain, can a defendant always ask for a bench trial as opposed to a jury trial?
In a case like this, both sides would have to agree to a bench trial. There's no chance that any defense lawyer would ever want a bench trial in a case where the guilt is completely overwhelming. What you want is you want 12 jurors and you want 12 opportunities to convince one juror not to convict. And oftentimes, as we all know as defense lawyers, you get a lot of nuts who want to be on trials like this and are susceptible to all sorts of ridiculous arguments by defense lawyers. So, and that's what I had this one case with a defendant who assaulted a cop. There was no question that he assaulted the cop. They were fighting, and the cop broke a ligament, tore a ligament in his thumb. And because he was injured, there was an automatic 2 years minimum, mandatory minimum. The case was completely dead. They were offering him the 2 years. The client refused to get it. The jury was a complete police officer jury. We ended up getting a hung jury. How? Because I had one juror that I could tell was buying the bullshit that I was selling. And what I ended up doing for the rest of the trial was directing every single argument to this one juror. I could tell he was laughing at everything I was saying. He was nodding his head. He was completely insane. At the end of the trial, I turned to the client. I said, "You're never getting convicted here," even though the case was an absolute slam dunk. Guess what? There was a hung jury. And as I went afterward to speak to the jurors, I went up to him and I thanked him. And he said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I wasn't the only one. You had 3 others." And I couldn't believe it. But that's what you're trying to do. If you go to a judge, the judge is going to be like, "Okay, I'll pretend that I'm fair." And as soon as you rest after your summation, your client's convicted in 3 seconds. You have 12 opportunities with 12 different jurors to sell your tale. And you know what? Sometimes it resonates. People are weird.
This next comment comes from Anna Bilowski. I'm sure I'm butchering it. I'm wondering why so many of the viewers are so concerned about humanizing the arrested man, that is Bryan Kohberger. Let's focus on evidence. But to you, Lara, is it important to paint a humanistic picture of your client to make them seem like a decent person, even in the face of all this horrific evidence and all the adversity and obviously all the negative press?
Obviously, you always have to humanize your client, because guess what? They're seen as monsters. It's almost like they're not human. I mean, I've noticed it sometimes when you even talk to prosecutors. Sometimes they forget that defendants are human, and of course, they're always, although they tell you, they're presuming that they're innocent, but there's clearly in their minds, if they've got this guy and they file the case, they're thinking he must be guilty. So it's very important. It's part of what we do, is to humanize them, whether it be with a prosecutor, the judge, or a jury, or in this case, it's going to have to be in the media. You don't want people to rush to judgment here. Everybody pretty much has convicted him. We all know that. So it's important. It is important to see that side. It's important for family, friends, anyone who can be out there. And in this case, I can't say he's got a PR team because he doesn't have private counsel, but anyone who can help, and I'm sure the family can, be out there humanizing him as much as possible. Maybe he didn't do it. We don't know. We have to presume him innocent until we are in a courtroom, we see all the evidence, and decide whether he's guilty or not.
Jeffrey, I got to ask you point blank. Are you able to tell us what kind of person, I'm talking on a one-to-one level, is El Chapo when you're dealing with him?
He was wonderful. I mean, I loved representing him. I still talk to him now. He was a very easy client. He was smart. He understood how hard I was working. He trusted me completely. He was actually much easier than most of my clients. He came to a foreign country where he was completely unfamiliar. He had been in America, I think, just a couple of times for a few days. So he was completely a fish out of water. And he had to trust me, and he did. I found him very easy to represent. It was everything else about the trial that was so difficult. He was easy, though, very calm, very stoic. He appreciated the crosses that I did. He appreciated the opening, the summation. He gave me feedback. He's a lot different. I think people expected him to be some kind of maniac. He really wasn't. We talked about a lot of personal things during the time we spent together. And we spent hundreds of hours talking pre-trial, and we actually had a lot in common.
He's a fascinating character because if he wasn't the biggest drug lord in the world, he might be the CEO of Walmart, right? You never know. I mean, he's got the skills.
Well, Walmart's done pretty well the last couple of years. Maybe not Walmart, maybe something like maybe Peloton.
Maybe. Maybe. Good analogy. Good to laugh even through the difficult times. This next comment, I'll shoot it right back to you, Jeffrey. It's from Kayla Phillips. It has to be soul crushing to represent people like this. Do these attorneys get harassed after they defend defendants like Bryan Kohberger? I can't imagine being in your guys' shoes. So, I mean, Jeffrey, back to you. You are representing El Chapo, who, to be honest, half the world probably mythologizes and the other half demonizes. But did you take heat for repping a guy like that?
You know, I don't know if you consider probably about 1,000 death threats, getting stalked, people coming to my office, people coming to my home. You know, if you call that a harassment, I suppose I was harassed a little bit. I mean, look, it's very difficult work. The public can be so idiotic and unfair. Like, how could you represent that man? Well, what am I supposed to do? You know, we live in a country where we have a constitution. But I say to people, look, if you don't think that my client deserves a trial, go move to Iran. You want to go there and you can get arrested, you can have your trial, you can be convicted, and you can be hanged all within 48 hours. If you want to live in America, you have to understand that we have trials here. So you can hate me all you want, but I'm going to do my best. I mean, I get hated. I did an interview on a radio station last night, and the hate afterward, you know, how could you represent this? Well, what am I supposed to do? I can't just represent innocent people. It would be a very limited career, and I'd be living probably in a large cardboard box, and I don't want to do that. I'd rather represent people and give them their constitutional rights, whether they're guilty or innocent. Is it soul crushing? You know what? It isn't, because you can't do this kind of work unless you can take that kind of heat. And when I get the hate and I get the threats, you know, am I allowed to curse on this? Is this a clean?
Yeah,
podcast?
you sure can.
Okay, my response is fuck you. You don't like it? Fuck you. Too bad. You're not paying my bills. You're not my mother. You don't get to. Listen, this is why also I'm probably heavily armed. I mean, in this room is a lot you can't see here. You're only seeing. But the fact is, you can't do this kind of work unless that kind of stuff rolls off your back. And for me, look, I've had these kind of cases since I was in my 30s, where I had the bullseye on my back. You know what? My position is, you know, is what I think what Crazy Horse said during the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Today's a good day to die. We're all going to die someday. If it has to be today, tomorrow, I'm not going to get out of this life alive. It's all right. I'll be okay.
This is why I got the Jersey flag for guys like Lickman here. I love it. I love it. That I'm gonna promo with that FU. Happy Wanderer, Lara. It bothers me so much when attorneys talk about winning cases. That's not justice if the person really committed the murders. Now, I have to preface this by saying I was a political correspondent for many years in Washington, D.C., and it would drive me crazy, like how partisan everything was. And it was not about the issues. We all know it's just about winning the political race. Is it different? Does it have to be different for defense attorneys? Do you have to talk about winning cases? Is this person, and I mean it in the nicest way possible, just pie in the sky, kumbaya? The name reflects that a little bit by calling themselves Happy Wanderer. But do defense attorneys have to talk about winning cases?
I mean, it is part of what we do. We would hope that we can win the cases that we're trying. Does that mean that we're going to win every single one? No. But if you can establish a reasonable doubt and you've done everything you can advocating for your client, you're the only one that knows as far as the clients. Because I think people assume that our clients are all confessing to us. That's the one issue that I've had so many people ask me, when the clients tell you they've done it, how do you represent them? Why is it that you're assuming that the client is actually coming and confessing to us? Most of the time, we're not getting any confessions, and where you've got a confession, that's not necessarily the case that's going to trial. So yeah, what is wrong with attorneys saying we're going to be winning or wanting to win the case? That's when you're doing the best and you're advocating for your client. I don't see a problem with that at all.
Jeffrey, Snake Plissken. The defense will ask him to take a plea. He won't. His father will hire an attorney and go broke again. This guy's glass half empty. But I'm curious, will this go to trial in your opinion, or will there be a plea deal?
Well, it depends. They may not offer a plea deal. I mean, the case is so bad. You've got 4 young people that were butchered. I didn't get a plea offer in Guzman. I think the offer for Chapo was, he's got to take life without parole, but he won't have to wake up for trial every day. I doubt there's even going to be a plea here. It's not like they need to shield some of the victims from having to testify. They'll probably say, look, no deal unless he wants to take. Maybe what they'll do is they'll say, we'll give you life and we'll take the death penalty off the table. And he'll decide if he wants to spend the rest of his life in prison. Not every case do they offer a plea. In fact, most of my trials at this point in my career, I go to trial because I have no choice, because they're not offering any deal. When I represented Gotti Jr., they were so convinced they were going to get a conviction that they made this ridiculously high offer. Had they made a fair offer, we would have taken it, and I wouldn't be a famous criminal defense lawyer today. So I thank God for those dumb prosecutors. They were dumb. They made a mistake. They underestimated us. But sometimes you don't have a choice, and oftentimes that's what happens. You go to trial whether you want to or not. And with what Lara said before, of course we talk about winning cases and justice to a defense lawyer. We're not here to get the truth. Just so we're clear here. We're here to defend our clients and give them their constitutional rights. Perhaps the trial is a search for the truth, but we're not leading the search party. We're just there to defend our guy. And that's it. Justice for us, for the defense lawyer, and for the defendant is getting a fair trial in which all of your constitutional rights are protected. That's it. It's not to find out the truth of what happened. It's just to give them their rights. And let me tell you, you cannot do this kind of work unless you are a maniacally, and I use that word again, that's not a coincidence, unless you are maniacally competitive. Of course, I want to win everything. And sometimes you win even though you lose a case, with a case where everybody expects the client to get convicted of the top counts, spend the rest of his life in prison, and you win a minor count and he spends 3 or 4 years. That's a win, even though the prosecutors would tell you that they won the trial.
All your talk about competitiveness, it's making me want to make my 3-year-old boy go out and hit 1,000 forehands right now, but I'll ease up because it's 7:40 at night.
It's kind of you.
So there is another Bryan, a high-profile Bryan, who likely has more incriminating evidence against him than Bryan Kohberger. And, of course, we're talking about Bryan Walsh. And I just want to say that our thoughts are with the Walsh family, Anna Walsh, and her 3 young children. It appears that she is no longer with us. There is news on that front, too. There was a court hearing for Bryan Walsh. Obviously, this is the case of the missing 39-year-old mother of 3 out of Cohasset, Massachusetts. Bryan Walsh, the husband, 47 years old, is ordered now held without bail for allegedly killing his wife and dismembering her body. He pleaded not guilty and was ordered, as I said, held without bail. And then today in the hearing, prosecutor talked about how he conducted numerous online searches related to body disposal on his son's iPad, of all things. How sweet. And some of the searches go like this. Can you be charged with murder without a body? On December 27th, he Googled, what's the best state to divorce for a man, meaning which is the best state to do it in? How long before a body starts to smell? How to stop a body from decomposing? How to embalm a body? 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. And I'll pepper some more in here. But Lara, how in the world can you defend this guy? Because guilt is just stamped across his face, not to mention that kind of wry smile he had, which really irritated a lot of people when he walked into the courtroom for his initial appearance.
The question I would ask is, where's the body? Do we have it? My understanding is they don't have it. They filed the charges, unless something has come up today and I've missed it. My understanding is that they haven't found her. So technically she's still a missing person. Unless, again, in the next few months, something comes up. As a defense attorney, that's what you're going to focus on. Thinking about something, researching it, doesn't necessarily mean you actually did it.
Jeffrey, your response to that? I mean, it seems like, here, like he's got a $450 cleaning bill at Home Depot for cleaning supplies. He lied about his wife the day she went missing, said she was in an Uber and a Lyft. She was never in there, said she went to work on New Year's Day. I mean, if I'm a juror right now, it's guilty. Boom. I'm not even listening to anything else. So how do you even start with this client?
Well, this is a really tough one. I think this one is even worse than the Idaho case. You know, there used to be a belief in criminal defense work and in police work that if you don't have no body, no crime. But things have changed so much over the last 30, 40 years. You know, now you've got cell site records. You've got a video camera. Every building has one on for security purposes. You've got so many different things. You've got social media. People are making searches. Remember how it was in the 50s? You had none of this stuff. You didn't have cell phones. You had none of this stuff. So it was much easier to get away with a murder like this. You could do it and people actually weren't watching. Nowadays, it's almost impossible not to be seen, not to have every one of the moments of your life somehow preserved, either from your phone or otherwise, some electronic device. I think in a case like this, I mean, look, you obviously have to go with the fact that there's no body, but there apparently was her blood that was also found in some of the cleaning supplies that were found by his mother's apartment complex where he was placed after she supposedly disappeared. I mean, this is a tough one. I'd really have to sit in a room with a giant whiteboard, you know, those big whiteboards where you can sort of mush out the mistakes you make. It'd probably take me about 12, 16 hours to try to figure out a defense. It's that difficult. What you have to try to do in a case like this, there are raindrops pouring down on your head, and you literally have to dance in between them. You've got to figure out from every piece of evidence that somehow you can impeach it. But this is a tough one. The smirk didn't help. But by the time he goes to trial, it could be, you know, a year and a half, 2 years from now. No one's going to remember that, but the evidence is so overwhelming. It's the kind of case where I would be looking for some kind of plea deal if I could get it. There is no death penalty in Massachusetts, so there's not that issue. So they're going to probably want life. I think what you probably have to do is to try to get something less and perhaps say that, you know, for the kids' sake, so they don't have to see this trial, you know, you're doing it for them, and see if you can get something that would be less than life. I don't know how old he is. I think he's in his 40s. Maybe if you could get like a 50-year sentence and try to salvage the end. Otherwise, going to trial on this one, this case really stinks, and it would really require a lot of explaining to do.
He's 47 years old, Brian Walsh. Joseph Connor, and Lara, I'll send this to you. Dershowitz, as in Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard law professor, stated that as a defense attorney, he presumes his client guilty and works away from that. Good strategy or bad strategy?
I guess he's thinking from the prosecutor's point of view, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Every person has their own style and way of handling cases, and there's nothing wrong with seeing what the worst is in your case and try and that way you'll know what it is that you're fighting against. What is the worst evidence, right? Because whatever's pointing at guilt is what he's focusing on because he's presuming the client guilty. Again, it's just a strategy. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm sure it's worked for him. Why not?
We got a comment earlier from Mary, and I picked it for a reason. I'm curious here because this sounds like a defense attorney. It's important to consider Kohberger's drug use and drug history. And Jeff, I'll toss this one to you. Whenever you attempt to analyze his motives, otherwise you're just whistling in the dark. Reports on social media say he was a cocaine and heroin addict. This is hugely important in analyzing motive. With addicts and violent crime, there's often no other motive besides the drug. That sounds like an awfully good way to trip up a jury and at least, I don't know, infuse some reasonable doubt that he was a drug addict, had a drug issue, and did this. Is it something you could work with, or are you just laughing it off?
I'm laughing it off in terms of the guilt phase. I mean, perhaps for the death penalty phase, you'd want to use that to say that he's had some serious drug problems and perhaps he was on drugs that night and he shouldn't get the death penalty. But you can't use voluntary intoxication as defense for hacking 4 people up, especially when there was so much planning that went into this in terms of the stalking, in terms of the Instagram messages. I don't think that really helps. And also, as a defense lawyer, we don't care about we're not here to make up a motive. We're trying to claim that our client didn't do it at all. Let the government, let the people do that. That's not for us. We don't care about the motive. If they come up with a motive and they're going to go with that as their theory, then we're going to try to poke holes in it. But we're going to certainly, I don't think in a case like this, you want to set out any kind of motive. Motive for what? He's innocent.
I agree. The motive is always the prosecutor's ball game. I mean, we don't really care, but I mean, if it's lacking, obviously, it does resonate with the jury. Jurors are always looking for why. Why did this individual do it? And that's why prosecutors always, even though legally they don't need to have motive, they always have that story. They have a reason or a motive for why this crime was committed to sell the story to the jury.
Mary, quite contrary, must be from Jersey too, because she commented, "You can effing curse all you effing want." LOL, using the actual words. This is another comment that was tweeted at me. Reading a lot into the guy just sitting there quietly in court during a status hearing where he's not supposed to do anything but sit there. What is he supposed to do? Yell out, squirm, cry? I also hope professionals stop ending so many sentences on an inappropriate up note. I don't know what that means exactly, but Lara, back to you on this. How do you coach your defendant when sitting in a courtroom? Because everyone is looking at this person. How important is it to coach them and have them presentable?
It's very important, and that's a discussion I'm assuming most attorneys will have. I do. With their clients, you don't want them to have outbursts. You don't want them to be smirking because everybody's watching them, especially the jury. The jury is watching everything you do. The jury watches your reactions, the lawyer's reactions. They watch the color of your hairdo, the shoes you're wearing, the suits you're wearing. They're looking at everything, watching every little thing. So it's important for him to stay composed, almost stoic, to take notes and to look like he's very much interested in his own case, which most of the defendants are. Sometimes they'll talk to you, never to speak to the judge never to speak to the judge at all unless it's a yes or a no, a technical thing, and everything they have to run it by you. So it's very important to coach your client because the jury who are going to be making a decision on the case, they're going to be watching everything. And in this case, the media is watching everything and they're reading into every little movement or gesture.
Jeffrey, Chico's mommy is a friend of the show. She comments often and I appreciate it often. She writes, "How do the lawyers feel when they defend someone who is found not guilty, but deep down they know differently?" Have you had that happen and how do you handle it?
All the time. It doesn't bother me. I mean, again, I represented a fellow who was convicted. I didn't do the trial, was convicted of molesting 4 small brothers. It was horrible. I did the motion for a new trial and got a hearing, cross-examined the trial attorney, and got the conviction vacated and the client released from a 27-year sentence where he surely would have been beaten to death in prison. That was probably the closest I ever felt feeling a little bit bad about what I had done. But at the same time, I'm not going to throw a case. If that's the kind of person I am, I shouldn't be doing this for a living. It does. I've also had clients who I've gotten acquitted and they've gotten out of jail and they've killed again. You try not to think about that kind of stuff because it takes away from your effectiveness. Again, this kind of work isn't for everybody. To be a criminal defense lawyer, there's got to be something a little bit wrong with you. You cannot be a completely normal person. You simply can't. The ones that want to go into corporate law, I remember when I was graduating law school and the other kids in the class, there were 200 graduates in my 1990 Duke Law graduating class. And I think I was one of 2 or 3 that became defense lawyers. Everybody was laughing at me. And how could you do this? There's not enough money. What are you? And that's all these lawyers care about was money. I cared about the drama, the responsibility, the excitement. This is what I wanted, the pressure. I wanted all of that. You cannot let those types of things affect you. I understand why the public feels that way. Like as they're watching this, they're thinking, what is wrong with this lawyer? If it was your loved one who was accused of something horrific, would you want a lawyer who was afraid to defend your loved one or you? Would you want a lawyer who was disgusted with his client? Or would you want a lawyer who's willing to walk through a wall for you? That's what you'd want. And that's what you'd get.
Jeffrey, I'm with you on one point. If you're disgusted of your own client, and if you don't believe your own client, I don't think you should be representing him. The bottom line is this isn't something we do on intuition and deep down what I'm thinking. It doesn't matter what my intuition says. It doesn't matter what my gut feeling is or my visceral reaction or feeling is in this case. You as an advocate, your job is to be the best advocate for your client, to represent him the best you can, and not sit there second guessing and doubting yourself, because if you are, then you're not the right person for that individual. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be in the business.
I think that's a fair comment, and I'm horrified what's going to come out of my mouth right now. I've had plenty of clients. I've had plenty of clients who I didn't like personally, and I've represented them to the death, and I've won trials and never even shook their hand after I got them acquitted. And I can tell you why. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I said to John Gotti Jr. when he hired me. I was young. I was in my 30s, and he didn't want to go with an older established lawyer. He had known me because I had worked in Jerry Shargel's office, who was maybe the best lawyer in the country at the time. He left us last year. He died. But I was a young associate, and I met him there. And I said to him, John, look, here's the deal. I love you as a brother, and I really got close with him. I said, but I'm going to tell you something that's really brutally honest here. I'm going to try to win this case for me. I'm trying to win this case for me. I'm getting this opportunity in this, world-renowned case where no one thinks that we can win. And I'm going to win this case for me because I know that this will change my life. And I said, you're my brother, and you're going to ride on my back right out of the jail and into the street. He said, that's how I feel about these cases, is that I'm there for me first, because there's nobody that I care about in this world, more, other than like my family, is me. And I am here to win this case. And if I can do you a solid by giving you that win too, well, guess what? You want somebody who's not just going to fight for some stranger that they met 6 or 9 months earlier. You want them to fight to the death for themselves. And that's how I feel in these cases. When I'm in front of the jury, I remember, I'm going to use the Gotti case again. During the trial, my kids turned 1. I have twin boys. They were in the hospital. They were premature, 10 weeks. They were in the hospital for a long time while I was getting ready for that trial. And that's who I was thinking about during my summation as the tears were rolling down my face, was that I felt, look, I love John, and he's, such a good friend that all these years later, my kids turned 1 during the trial. He came to my kid's bar mitzvah. But I am here for myself, and there is no one I'm going to fight harder for but me and my kids. And guess what? It works. It gives you that extra energy when you don't think you have it.
Between Gotti and El Chapo, Jeffrey's got some pretty good security around him. Mary Wall, the next comment. I've heard lawyers predict that Kohberger will likely want to run his defense with stronghold. How do you deal with clients who disregard your advice? Lara, to you, what would you say to Bryan Kohberger if you're defending him and he says, I want to be the lead, I guess he couldn't be the lead attorney. He's not an attorney, but if he wanted to run his case, would you say, see you later?
Pretty much. I mean, he can't be running his case. If he's going to be running his case, then he doesn't need me. I'm not going to put up with that. You have to have some client control. And if you don't have client control and you can't, this is I mean, it is the client's case and it's the client's life, but you're the attorney and you're the one who needs to make a lot of the decisions, except for there are some decisions, including whether he's going to testify or not. Of course, you would advise them that, depending on the situation, advise them to do it or not to do it, depending on the case. But at the end of the day, that is going to be their decision. But the rest of the strategy, yes, I would listen to the client. I would ask what their opinion is, spend a lot of time with the client, get as much information from him or from her, have discussions with the client. But at the end of the day, you as the attorney are running the show, not the client.
Lara, I'm going to toss this back to you. This is from Merit Seger Design. I'm butchering that. When did murder become a better choice than divorce? This world is insane. Obviously talking about Brian Walsh, but you guys both have so much experience, I mean, as criminal defense attorneys, but dealing with, I mean, you have to, by what you're doing, delve into the psychology of this. I mean, what is it about a person when he crosses that line? I'm asking you to speak as a human, not as a defense attorney now, making that choice to kill the wife instead of just separating away from her. How do you make sense of that?
It's not an easy one because I can't be in the mind of someone who has done it and why they would do it. Yes, I mean, I've had a high profile client, and obviously he was convicted, but I can tell you, I have never thought that Scott Peterson was one that killed his wife. And I'm still a true believer. And I'm hoping one of these days his case will be overturned and that case will be retried. That was a circumstantial case. So I can't tell you what's in the psyche of these people, what gets people, whether it's mental health issues, whether, you know, the relationship, it was so tumultuous that they were on the brink of going insane, or they're just killers. I don't know what gets people to do it. We've seen there's all sorts of personalities and all types of sociopaths. There's all sorts of reasons why people do it. And it could come up in any type of situation, whether it be marital situation or something else. So people do all sorts of crazy things. And I'm not the psychologist here, although sometimes I feel like we have become psychologists nowadays.
Jeff, I don't mean to belabor this, but Nancy brings up this point, a very simple one: bloody hacksaw in your basement. Now, it's easy to defend a guy that doesn't have a crazy amount of evidence, but I mean, this is one scintilla of the evidence against this guy. So, I mean, not to beat a horse, but I will this time around. You're sitting in your office. This guy's your client. You're looking at a bloody hacksaw. You're looking at a knife, another knife. You're looking at blood in the basement. How can you even begin to evolve a defense for a person like this when everything points to his guilt?
Well, first of all, it depends whose blood it is. If it's the victim's blood, you know, it's a lot different than if it's his own blood. Chances are, if there's a bloody hacksaw in his basement, it's probably her blood. I mean, look, sometimes you have these cases where a lot of it is science, and you have to develop a cross-examination that shows that perhaps there is some reasonable doubt within the DNA testing or the blood testing. It's certainly possible. You have to see the reports, and sometimes you'll find some holes that you can poke, you know, some holes in the reports, but oftentimes you can't. And in cases like where there's absolutely no way out, I mean, I don't know that I've ever had a trial where I felt that there's no way out. I oftentimes tell clients this. I don't know if I would tell either one of these two guys, but I say, look, I can guarantee you this. By the time I give my summation and sit down, you're going to be convinced that you're going to win. And I often say to them, I'll give you your trial feedback if you don't believe that, because that's how convinced I am that I will be able to at least convince the client and some of the jurors that perhaps there's not enough evidence here. These two cases, boy, these are two tough ones. You have to spend, as I said, spend a lot of time looking at the evidence, looking at the science, and seeing if there was sloppiness. Perhaps gloves weren't used when there should have been. Perhaps there's a chain of custody issue. You know, oftentimes even though everybody knows that the defendant is guilty, it doesn't mean that law enforcement doesn't make mistakes in their investigation. And when you find those mistakes, and there will be mistakes, you pounce on them. And it's like the old, this is a Jersey thing. It's like the old Polish joke from the 70s. A guy loses his keys in a crowded bar, and his friends find him 2 blocks away underneath a streetlight looking for his keys. And they say, "What are you looking for your keys over there? You lost them in the bar." He says, "Well, the light's better over here." And that's sort of what you have to do, is you have to focus on the weakness of their case and keep pounding. And I often say this in cases, look, why would this government witness lie about something as dumb as this? Well, sometimes they lie about things that there's no rhyme or reason. And you just sort of pick it apart. You're pulling that thread. You're looking at the jury. You're seeing how they're reacting. You're seeing if there's a couple of jurors that are nodding their heads with you. So now you're going to focus on that issue over and over and over again. They're supposed to be in a tube where they're not reading the media. Of course, oftentimes they do regardless. But if they're really being truthful and not looking at the media and not being told by the mainstream media to convict, sometimes you can get a hung jury. And I've gotten more hung juries than I have convictions in my life by far at trial.
720 Red Dog. We'll take a few more and then we'll get some closing remarks. 720 Red Dog writes, that Walsh guy was so sloppy. Someone else said, I can't believe he's only 47. He looks 67. Lara, I'd say he was a lot more than just sloppy, basically beyond dumb, and obviously a sociopath, which he's been diagnosed as. Patricia writes here, he's that corrupt that even his father wrote him out of his will. The state will try to assassinate his character. And again, as a defense attorney, what can you do to protect that character? He allegedly stole money from the father who did write him out of the will. You can bet the state will bring that up. How in the world would you defend that?
Are we talking about his character? We're going to have an uphill battle, that's for sure. If his own father wrote him out of the will, that's going to be an uphill battle. Not an easy one in this case. He's going to be hated before they start a trial, and unless the defense in this case uncovers some wonderful things about him, like family and friends and neighbors, or anyone who's been in his life who can say wonderful things about him, I'm not really sure what you do with the situation. Again, this case, it's not just about character assassination. It's really going to be based on the evidence. And it looks like there's plenty here. Yes, I said it, there's no body, which is going to be, as a defense attorney, what are you going to focus on? What's missing? What is it that the prosecution needs? But you look at the rest of the evidence, like the bloody hack and some of the lies, the fact that he didn't report it to the cops. His wife is gone for 4 or 5 days. He doesn't get any calls. Why is it that he's not concerned? Why is it that he's lying about where he went and he wasn't being honest with the cops? There's a lot going on, and obviously the searches. So I'm not concerned about the character at this point or character assassination. I'm more concerned about the evidence here.
Donna or Linda is yelling at me that I'm allowing profanity. Normally I don't, but when I got a guy from Jersey on, anything goes, man. It brings me back home. This next comment here from BuzzFeed Print Edition, and you better print a story about surviving the survivor since I'm reading your comment. He looks completely unwound. Try for incompetence. This, I assume, is Brian Walsh. There is no insanity defense in the state of Idaho. So let's assume this is for Brian Walsh. Would that be a tactic, Jeffrey, to say, hey, this guy was diagnosed as a sociopath. He's out of his mind. He's insane. Let's stick him in a psych hospital.
It's a pretty heavy standard to use that as a defense. I think what I might do is go through a psychological history. Look, you don't just kill a bunch of people out of the blue. There's obviously some sort of traumatic event or events during one's life that turns them into this kind of person to do this incredibly bunch of heinous acts. So you try to find what that is, you try to develop it, and perhaps you can go to the prosecutors and say, look, I know that you want to get the conviction here because it's high profile and you want to appear like you're tough on crime, but maybe he was a victim too of something that right now the public doesn't know about. And that's the sort of thing that perhaps you can go with a package with all the psychological history and convince a prosecutor to back off a little bit. I'm not saying a lot. Maybe that gets rid of the death penalty, get that off the table. Maybe you can get something that avoids a life sentence without parole.
Jeffrey, right back to you with Mabel Quintanilla, who's also a friend of the show. Shout out to Mabel, one of my favorite names. And Mabel, I'll tell you why one day. This episode is a master class on our constitutional rights. I need to watch it several times. Jeffrey, back to you on this. We live in the United States of America. It has a constitution. You can not like the legal system, not like a person. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to the law, right? I mean, if that breaks down, do you think our society breaks down?
There's no question. I mean, look, the criminal justice system isn't the best. It's not fantastic in America, but find me a country on the planet where it's better. You won't find one. This is the best justice system in the world with all of its faults. And if we start putting people in jail without trials, why? Just because the New York Post says that they're guilty? Look, this is the idiocy sometimes of the public, as they just feel that people don't deserve a defense. Well, they all say that until they or their loved ones get arrested for something. Then all of a sudden they want you to pull out all the stops to prevent the conviction. Yes, in America, without our justice system, without it, we very quickly slide into anarchy and to a dictatorship, I suppose.
Lara, this question I'm trying to construe. It's from Meritsager Design. It could be argued that he, and this is Kohberger, pointed the criminal in their direction, and he's still part of the crime. His survey, criminal should not be driving his car 12 times or in it all for that matter. What I'm deciphering from this, there's a lot of talk out there that Kohberger, and this is all very speculative, had some sort of accomplice. There was even a SWAT situation where someone was killed by police, and some are speculating that he had some involvement. As a criminal defense attorney, do you try to run with something like that and try to grow the seeds of reasonable doubt into making a jury believe that maybe someone else was involved and he didn't have, he wasn't the primary suspect in the case? Or is that just going down a rabbit hole that takes you nowhere?
It depends. And again, I don't have enough information, but if it's a viable argument, why not? But if it's not, then you lose credibility and you don't want to do that. That's the way I would approach it. With Kohberger, I don't know. I haven't seen anything other than what you just said. Everything seems to point at him. I haven't heard of any potential accomplice, and I haven't seen anything that can point to an accomplice. But again, we'll get more information over the next few months. And if there's anything that points at an accomplice or someone else, another individual who may have done this, I'm sure his attorneys are going to be using that and they're going to bring it up. They have to. It's malpractice if they don't. Again, unless it's not, it's very minimal and they can't really run with it.
And Donna D here echoes what Jeffrey was saying. Look at it on the flip side. If you were charged with a crime, wouldn't you want your lawyer to fight for you to their best ability? Every citizen has a right to trial. Don't begrudge that right. Lara Yeretsian, who is in that very pretty violet-looking sport jacket, is
I'm
the
glad
principal.
you like it.
What's that?
I'm glad you like it.
She is the principal of Yeretsian Law, a criminal defense firm in Glendale, California. She worked at the law offices of Garagos and Garagos, as in Mark Garagos. She worked with some high-profile defendants, including Michael Jackson, Nate Dogg, the rapper, and even Scott Peterson. Lara, where do you think this Kohberger case goes from here? And out of the Kohberger and Bryan Walsh case, which is an easier one, in your opinion, to defend?
Wow, I'm not sure which is. I think they're both difficult. Where they go, the Kohberger, I would think there's not going to be a plea in the Kohberger case. I think that's going to be a trial. I just don't see. in a case like this with the high emotions and then these four beautiful individuals who've lost their lives senselessly, really, I just don't see the prosecution wanting to make an offer. Now, you never know, but I think that's headed for trial eventually. At the other case, Brian Walsh, it's possible he may get a plea. But which one is easier versus the other? I think they're both super, super tough cases, equally tough for any defense attorney.
You don't hear a defense attorney backing off from a case too often. I know this guy, the bulldog from New Jersey, Jeffrey Lichtman. He's been a criminal defense attorney for over 30 years, primarily practicing in the federal and state courts of New York. He has defended the Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. John Gotti Jr. went to his kid's bar mitzvah. The rappers The Game and Fat Joe may have rapped there. I don't know. But to you too, Jeffrey, would you rather defend Kohberger or Walsh? And how do you see both of these cases playing out?
I think I'd rather defend Walsh, because the Kohberger case, you're dealing with young victims that were completely innocent, and there's just such a different level of sinister in cases like that when you're dealing with innocent victims. Not that the Brian Walsh's wife needed killing, but she was an adult. She was in a marriage, and society doesn't seem, jurors and people don't see her the same way, with all respect. And I don't mean to diminish what happened to her. They don't view her the same as four innocent college kids who were sleeping and they got hacked to death. I suspect that with regard to the Idaho case, I mean, you got real frontier justice there. They're probably going to insist upon a trial. Would they possibly agree to life without parole in order to avoid the death penalty? I suppose it's possible. With regard to the Massachusetts case, I mean, look, you don't know what the evidence is going to be 3 months from now. You know, we're just looking at this case without even getting the evidence package. We don't know what's going to be developed. We don't know what the scientific tests are going to come back with. We don't know what more is out there. Right now, at least I suppose there's something you can argue, but you better have something good that's going to overcome those ridiculously bad searches and the material that was found in the dumpster by his mother's apartment complex. The question is, as Lara pointed out, it's not which case is better, it's which case is less horrible.
An excellent distinction. And with that, I'd like to thank Lara Yeretsian and Jeffrey Lichtman. Again, a quick programming note. Nancy Grace's take is on Surviving the Survivor. The episode drops at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't you worry. We'll be back soon enough with another episode of Surviving the Survivor. My Geraldo, goodbye. Love you, America, and love you, Jersey, and love you, LA.